Rabia, just to pick up discussions, if the media tribunal comes to pass, will it be constitutional?
Jackie, that's not an easy question to answer. And the reason for that is that what we really need to see here is the concrete proposals that the government has for what the media tribunal will actually do. And at the moment, we just simply don't know what the institutional structure will be around the tribunal. Issues that will be very important to determine the constitutionality of the tribunal will be questions like the independence of the tribunal. Who's going to appoint the tribunal? Who's going to finance it? How will the people who sit on the tribunal be removed? Will it be possible for the government to interfere with those individuals and their independence? That will be absolutely crucial. And then secondly, and also extremely vital, is what powers will this tribunal actually have? At the moment, what we know is that the tribunal is supposed to be a sort of super oversight body over the press ombudsman. And I say that because the wording that's been used in the ANC's discussion document, and also as has been suggested in COSATU's discussion document, is that this body will somehow oversee the press ombudsman. It's not clear whether they intend to abolish the press ombudsman altogether. So what we really need to see is what powers will they have? Will they be able to decide that you can't practice as a journalist anymore? We're going to license you, you're going to be revoked, etc., etc.
The ins and outs of the media tribunal, but in its current state, the fact that this talks about a media tribunal coming to pass, is that constitutional?
Well, any discussion in a democracy is permissible, and there's no such thing as a discussion which is not constitutional. And that's why I'm saying it's not an easy question to answer. The issue really will be what form, what kind of creature will this media tribunal be?
And we're going to get to that a bit later, but I'd like to pose a question to Themba to say, is self-regulation currently not working?
Well, self-regulation has been in place for many years, and I think it's time for some kind of a review, and that's what this debate is essential about. And our view, although government has not formally taken a decision on the establishment or not of the Media Appeals Tribunal, we think that it may not be a bad thing to debate the issue in the public space out there, because we're still a young, new, fledgling democracy, and there should not be anything that is beyond discussion and debate in this country. And the fact that the issue is being put on the table, we think it's a positive thing. It needs to be discussed and debated, because ultimately, whatever model that is put on the table, I think must serve the people of this country best. And I think that the debate should actually be welcome.
In fact, we do welcome the idea of a debate around this issue. The problem we have had, however, is that starting to the way the question was framed, looking at investigating a statutory appeals tribunal, that is what raises the red flag. And then immediately after that, you look again at the rhetoric that's been coming out of the tripartite alliance. Some people saying it's already a done deal, so it's no longer an investigation. People saying that, in fact, it's going to jail journalists, and the type of language is what makes us very uncomfortable. That there should be a review, we're very happy with it. In fact, the Press Council has already started a review of all its systems. Again, we have invited the public to participate in that discussion.
So are you saying, Joe, that it's a good thing or a bad thing that the press office is now under spotlight?
No, in fact, it's been good for us because we've never had so much publicity before.
Good point.
But what has happened is that, again, it's given us a chance to look at ourselves and say, is there anything that we can do to improve the system?
What about the role of the press ombudsman? Does it still stand with the media tribunal, or do people bypass the press ombudsman and go straight to the media tribunal?
What will be the process?
As Rabia said, the problem there is that we don't know what this press tribunal looks like.
Does it not concern you that a press ombudsman could be ineffective?
In fact, what would happen is that if people knew that they were going, publications knew that they had to face the tribunal in the end, very few of them would respond to the press ombudsman's complaints. If I send a complaint to an editor and say, can you respond to this complaint? He'll say, no, I'll wait until we get to the tribunal. So it's going to raise questions of authority, whatever, of mandates and legitimacy.
Let's just look at the current recourse, Joe, in terms of defamation or inaccuracy. What is the current recourse?
What happens is that a person sends in a complaint. We send the complaint to the editor and say, we have this complaint. Very often, the editor says, oops, we made a mistake, and they correct the mistake. But then there are times when they say, we stand by what we wrote, and then we have a hearing. And again, at that hearing, we have a person from the public participating, assisting me in that hearing. And we have a person from the press, and we hear the evidence, and at the end of it, we make a ruling. Ultimately, the results will be either publish an apology, a retraction.
Themba, are you saying, not you, the government saying that the recourse is not sufficient?
Part of the issue raised, for instance, those who are advocating for the establishment of the tribunal, firstly, that the process sometimes takes too long to yield results. Secondly, even if a newspaper finds that it has made a mistake, they'll end up printing an apology on the 3rd or 4th or 5th page.
So the retraction is too low.
Significant. So those are some of the issues. But I think what's important to just put on the table is just to say the need for regulation. I think that everybody agrees, including the media, by the way. They accept that. If you look at the model that exists for broadcasting side, they've got a commission that looks at complaints. Your radio stations, your TV broadcasters always advertise that if you have a complaint, please report to us. It's a body that is separate from the broadcasters themselves. So I think that what we need to look at is the current model, which is self-regulation for print media, because that's what we're talking about. It's not everybody else, it's print media. What is the best model to put in place to make sure that you can address concerns that may be existing out there? And the proposal is, the media are saying basically, we believe that self-regulation is the only way, is the best way to go. And the other view basically says that let's look at another body that can actually look at it, that is separate and independent from the media. And that's actually the debate. But I've not heard the media people saying that newspapers or magazines should not be regulated at all. They're saying that they want to regulate it as a media industry. And the other view says, let's set up an independent body to just make sure that the regulation is seen to be objective and independent and outside of the industry.
So the main concern is the recourse of defamation, etc. What do you think would be the appropriate recourse?
Well, at this particular point in time, again, we're saying it's still a debate, something that needs to be put on the table. Even those who are proposing the media tribunal, it's not been unpacked, it's not been explained. I think that the real animal, nobody knows what form or shape it will actually look like. So I think that my reading of the documentation says, give Parliament the responsibility to investigate the kind of animal that should be put in place. The media must give its views, the public must give its views. And I think that if you look at that proposal, if that is the proposal, let Parliament investigate, then I think there's merit in doing so. Because if you recall, you might be aware that in the UK, the Parliament in the United Kingdom is also dealing with these kinds of issues, saying what is the best way of regulating the media environment. And I don't see anything wrong in principle with us exploring or investigating possibilities.
Absolutely.
Can I quickly say that the UK government, after the select committee investigated, they came to the conclusion that self-regulation is still the best form of regulation. And the parliamentary committee actually made some recommendations on how that system can be improved. And they have left decisions on their recommendations to the Press Council in the UK.
But importantly, the portfolio committee did the investigation, which is what the proposal is here. Let the committee investigate it even for this kind
Let's get Arabia in. What does this mean for our legal system?
Look, I think the issue here that has been ignored, largely ignored in this debate, is what is the current legal regulation of the media? Because what we keep hearing from the proponents of the Media Appeals Tribunal is that there's insufficient legal regulation at the moment. And that is not completely accurate, because at the moment what we have is a very good court system with excellent judges. And if you feel that your reputation has been damaged in any way, you can simply lodge a defamation claim. You can also do a privacy claim against the newspaper, etc. Now, one of the objections that's been raised to this counter argument is that, well, we all know how long things take to go through the courts, and we all know that you can only go there if you have money. Now, in my view, that is a completely separate and distinct issue as to whether or not the system actually works. Whether you can afford to use the system and whether the system works is a different issue.
Yeah, but what Themba is saying is that the retraction or the apology is always made, let's say for the print media, is written on the 5th page when the headline was on the 1st page. So what would be an appropriate recourse?
Well, when we talk about defamation actions, there's two things that you can potentially get out of a defamation claim. You can get money, which will obviously not fix your reputation at the end of the day, because people won't necessarily know that the accusations were not true. Or the second thing is that you can also request an apology, which you can then insist on going and having published in whatever forum you want to have it published. And what is happening with the press ombudsman is that Joe does direct the publication of a necessary apology. And there have been a number of instances where the ombudsman has actually instructed a newspaper to publish that apology on the front page, or to publish that apology with the same prominence as the initial article. And that's obviously not a hard and fast rule.
But what Jackie was saying earlier was that, let's say a media tribunal does come to pass. What happens to our legal system? And what happens to the press ombudsman? Do we bypass the press ombudsman and just do the media tribunal? And then what happens to the legality of the whole matter?
Well, those are some of the important questions that we need to look into, and those are the questions that we can only answer when we actually know what is it that they plan to do. And these are the questions that, in fact, whatever investigation is going to be undertaken, the portfolio committee responsible will need to look into these issues, because you can't simply have an institution which does not sit well or function within the current structure. So as you quite rightly point out, Fenley, if we're going to have this media appeals tribunal, it cannot be an institution that causes confusion as to what is now the role of the press ombudsman, what is now the role of the court, etc. Because if people now have 3 different forums, there will be forum shopping, and it could become very inappropriate. For example, there's been an argument that the press ombudsman requires people to waive their rights before they come to the press ombudsman. So if you go to the ombudsman, you can't then later on sue for defamation. And the reason for that is that if you're going to use the press ombudsman as a fishing expedition to extract all the information and all the evidence before you go to court, then it's going to become a pointless exercise. Nobody will want to go to the press ombudsman if they know that once they've gone there in good faith and given out all the information, it will turn into a court process, which is a very different thing, with a lot of structures and rules and technical arguments. And you would already have extracted all the evidence that you are then going to use against them in court. So those are some of the issues that we need to debate around this media appeals tribunal.
Timber, would you like to comment on some of the issues raised here?
Yes, I think she's making very valid points, which I think is what is required in this debate, because there's just too much emotion in the debate. If you're reading newspapers, watching some of the television programs, there's a lot of emotion, and I think that's what we need, a rational discussion and debate, so that we can find the best model. And I'm saying for broadcast media, we have a model that's working very well. So let's come back to, can I just finish on my point? The point about apologies, the point you were raising earlier on, I think it's getting better, especially since the start of this debate. I think we're starting to see more and more newspapers putting the apologies on the front pages and highlighting them and even shading them to just make sure that they're actually seeing this. And I think what needs to be understood as well is the extent to which it causes embarrassment to the editor, to the newspaper, to put in an apology that says you made a mistake and you're admitting it. So that's important. And in designing a new model, we want to have to take those factors into account. But I think that it's absolutely crucial for us to begin to say yes, because whether we have media tribunals or not, there's going to be some kind of self-regulation. Self-regulation starts in the newspaper itself, with the editors and their own internal processes. So that's self-regulation. It then goes to the industry. The industry must also have its rules. Like the media currently, the Press Council has its own rules and regulations. But the point is this the best model for the country? And that is the debate that needs to take place. 16 years into our democracy, I think that's important.
Tema, I just want to respond to a couple of issues that you raised. The first issue is the issue of broadcasting and whether that's working well or not. I think there's 2 points there. The first is that, first of all, broadcasting, or the regulation of broadcasting, is actually mandated by the Constitution. In terms of Section 192 of the Constitution, the state was actually required to set up ICASA as an independent body, as you know. And that is quite distinct from the situation with the press, because the press are not required to be regulated under the Constitution. So within our constitutional system itself, it mandates the regulation of the broadcasters, and I don't think we can simply bunch the 2 things together. And the reason why broadcasting has traditionally been more regulated than the press, or at least what the theory is behind that, is that there's a limited spectrum, and so that needs to be controlled by government through licensing. We can't have everybody just starting up a radio or television station, and once you've licensed that person, you're then entitled to come in and put some kind of strictures in place, because you won't have people that abuse the spectrum. You can then withdraw and have somebody else in in that space instead, then that is very different from the press environment where any person can start up their own newspaper. I can go on and start my own blog and say whatever I have to say. I can stand on the side of the road and hand out written pamphlets. That amounts to publication. And so I think that the two things are quite distinct. That was my first issue. The second issue is that...
Let him answer that before we can carry on.
Okay.
They may be different, but I mean, the fact of the matter is that we're dealing with the media and the role of media in society generally. So the fact that for broadcasting, the Constitution provides for it, and for print media, it doesn't provide for regulation, doesn't necessarily mean that there doesn't need to be regulation of the media, because the Constitution said for broadcast media, yes, there will be regulation, and this is the form, but it did not say there should not be regulation of print media. But in the discussion and debate in the country, there's understanding, agreement between all the role players, including media itself, or print media itself, that there is need of some form of regulation. They're opting for self-regulation, and the other view says, let's look at other models, other forms of regulation that need to be put in place. So I think that we should not even stretch your argument to the extent of saying the debate should not even take place, because it's not provided for in the Constitution.
No, I'm certainly not even suggesting that the debate should not take place because it's not provided for in the Constitution. What I'm saying is that from a constitutional and legal perspective, the two have a significant difference in terms of how you then analyze the constitutionality thereof.
Let's bring Joe in. Do you agree with
I agree with Okarabia.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what do you disagree with Temba there?
The essence of it is that Section 16 grants everyone the right to freedom of expression. And the limitations to that right are very specific.
Okay.
Now, if you go beyond those limitations that are spelled out in Section 16, you then need to look at other sections. I think it's Section 36 of the Constitution that says no rights that are protected by the Constitution can be interfered with unless under specific circumstances. And I don't think that we will be able to solve that specific problem by going by the route of the statutory media.
Timber, what's your view? I know you want to say something.
We're going to run out of time very soon, but I think it's important to also understand that the Constitution provides a variety of rights. One of those rights is actually the right to privacy. So, and there are a lot of instances.
Before we get into rights of privacy, let's talk about what he talked about, the right to freedom.
Getting to that. Because in some instances, especially in issues such as defamation, we have a lawyer here, there could be a conflict between the right to freedom of expression and the right to privacy. And somebody could feel that a newspaper, in expressing its right to freedom of expression or free media, could actually infringe on that person's right to privacy. So it becomes important for us to understand that
Which is fair, but do we need a media tribunal for that? Isn't there a court of law for
well,
that?
That's the point we're actually trying to, that's being put on the table for debate here. Let's get Parliament to explore these issues, because these are real issues. I mean, these are issues that are being put on the table for debate. Let them be explored. Let's get a structure that can investigate this. And the proposal I've seen in the discussion document says, let Parliament actually initiate a public process where the media can come in, where the experts can come in, but the public can also come in to say what is the best way to regulate print media.
We're definitely not going to agree on this. So let's go to the international media. How different is the international media to what is happening in South Africa, Joe?
In fact, before we started our system in 2007, we trawled around the world to find out what's the best system. And we found that the majority of press councils around the world are structured the way that we are structured at the moment. In fact, we came to something like 80% of them are structured that way. And the 20% were in strange countries like Zimbabwe, China. I won't go there.
I think there's certainly, people are saying that there's a risk for us, for South Africa to become a Zimbabwe. Semba, would you like to comment on that?
That's neither factual nor relevant, I think, to the discussion, because I don't think that there's anybody who can stand up in any platform and argue that media freedom is under threat in this country. And if there are instances or somebody suggesting that, we have a constitution, probably one of the best constitutions in the country, to make sure that what's provided for in the constitution is not infringed upon by anybody.
So we need to find a middle
so
way. Is that what we're saying?
I think that from a government perspective, we think that we should allow the discussion and debate to take place. let a proper and thorough investigation actually be conducted. The investigation may come and say, actually, the current model is correct, it should actually stay, but it may say introduce something else, but the discussion needs to take place.
Well, let's look at the best practices in terms of a way forward, consider in light of a media tribunal. What do you think will be the appropriate way forward, Joe?
As I say, what's happened is that the Press Council has started a review where we are looking at the constitution of the Press Council, looking at the press code, at the complaints procedures, and doing a complete review of those. And with input from the public, we might find that there are suggestions that we have overlooked and that we put into the system at the moment.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I think the constitutional thing at this point is that it's the media themselves who have to do that introspection.
Yeah.
So self-regulation,
Yeah.
you're still saying with self-regulation, right?
The investigation that is being done, as I say, we have absolutely nothing against it, except we are worried about the rhetoric that has developed around it.
Yeah. Does it not concern you that we ranked like number 66 in the world out of 195 or so in terms of press freedom? I mean, do you think this media tribunal will pull us down even further?
I thought we were ranked much higher than that, around the 30s, I should think.
30s,
Yeah.
okay. Are you concerned that it's going to go further down?
It will go down if, in fact, we take a route that is against the Constitution. But
Okay.
let's grant the ANC one thing, that, in fact, in the discussion document, they have been very specific. They are saying the outcome should not, in fact, go against what the Constitution says.
Yeah.
I think we should, grant them
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Just very briefly, Octavia, in terms of best practices and the law in the country, what do you think is the way forward?
I think that the way forward is a system of self-regulation. And the reason why I say that is, as Joe has pointed out, international best practice indicates that in most progressive democracies where press freedom is truly respected, that is the way. And also that is what our Constitution, I would argue that the underlying values and ethos of our Constitution would suggest it. And in fact, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights has also emphatically stated that self-regulation is the best form of media regulation, and has and that it condemns situations where the government tries to impose mechanisms that are not independent to try and regulate the media. So I would strongly urge the state to look into encouraging the review that's being done by the Press Council at the moment, rather than imposing something which is at risk of not being independent.
Let's get some final thoughts on a middle ground between government and media, starting with Themba.
Well, at this stage, as I said, it's not yet a government position, so we're just watching the debate and hoping that it will give us some direction. What's important, though, is that this very debate actually has led the Press Council to actually start its own internal review to find ways of strengthening it. And that's why I'm putting a lot of emphasis in saying this discussion has actually been important. This debate has been important because we can't just assume that because something was implemented in the past is necessarily the best to going forward. So the review, I think, is of interest to us. We're looking at it. We're going to be talking to the Press Council to just understand what exactly are they proposing out of their review. So I think that this has been a good discussion.
Joe?
As I said, we haven't had as much publicity as we're getting now. But again, I should point out that Themba made one mistake saying that we're seeing more, in fact, more apologies appearing in the newspapers. In fact, it's because we have more staff in the office, so we're able to do things, things better. That probably started in November when, in fact, I got a deputy. But ultimately, it has been happening.
So in other words, you're just a one-person show as the ombudsman. Is that what you're saying, Braja?
Just myself and the press appeals panel, which consists of about 12 people, 6 from the press, 6 from the public.
So the process has not been sufficient in terms of capacity to deal with
But they're
the
looking
issues.
at it.
But they're dealing
And
with it.
lastly, your comment?
Well, just to respond, I think capacity is different from the need to change the system completely. You could also support the Press Council by giving them funding to perhaps employ more people or something along those lines. I think, honestly, my final point is the point that I made earlier, that we would strongly encourage perhaps it's not a government position yet, an ANC position, we would strongly encourage the ANC to stick to the self-regulatory mechanism, and that our Section 16 of our Constitution does envisage a very robust and inquiring media, and that the right to freedom of expression does not mean that you will always say what people want to say or that you'll always get it right, but that you have the right to say those things.
All right. Arabia, Joe and Themba, thank you very much for joining us today.